Before I begin this video, I figured it would be inappropriate to start a video that briefly discusses racial differences, discrimination, and subjugation, without acknowledging the bigger issues currently unfolding in the real world. I'll start off by saying that I do not support police brutality or racism of any kind. There has been a huge movement speaking out against racially motivated police brutality, sparked by the tragic death of George Floyd. However, it's important to remember that countless other black people, as well as other minorities, have suffered greatly and even died due to the racism, prejudice, and senseless cruelty of others. Racism is unacceptable. Police brutality is unacceptable. The unfair treatment of minorities by people in positions of power over them due to prejudice is unacceptable. I wholeheartedly support organizations like Black Lives Matter and others that advocate for the fair, equal treatment of everyone regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, or sexual orientation. The game of Final Fantasy XIV has myriad races, and while these are fictional races in a fictional universe, the message and atmosphere promoted by both the game's story and by the player base as a whole is largely the same. It is a message of equality, of the value of lives of everyone regardless of who they are, and of unity. There is no place in the Final Fantasy XIV community for racism, and even as a relatively small content creator still trying to grow his own channel, there is no room in my subscriber count for those who would judge people and treat them unfairly based on personal prejudices. To everyone else, thank you and enjoy the video. The Garleans, the oppressive militant empire that serves as the primary antagonistic force throughout much of the story of Final Fantasy XIV. However, the Garleans' history and role in the lore is much more elaborate than simply being the bad guy faction. Politics, discrimination, and Ascian meddling form the foundation of the Garlean Empire, and with the Garleans still posing as a significant threat to the Scions, I think it's important for us to know our enemy. Hello, I'm the Salt Exarch, and today we'll be diving deep by exploring the lore behind the Garleans. Now, Garlean is a word that can actually refer to two things. The first is the Garlean race, and the second is the Garlean Empire, which is comprised of both the Garlean race and numerous other races from conquered territories. The Garleans, as a race, are humanoids whose main distinguishing feature is their third eye, a small, gray-silver eye at the center of all pureblood Garleans' foreheads. I don't know if these eyes support actual sight in the conventional sense, but they are stated to help a Garlean with spatial recognition, and can aid in certain tasks such as flying airships and firing weapons. So they're definitely sending some form of visual information to the Garleans' brains. They also do seem to require a direct line of sight, as most Garlean headgear and helmets have transparent materials over the third eye as well. There is a misconception that a Garlean's third eye also allows them to see or visualize ether, much like how the Scion's goggles or Y'shtola can. However, while I saw a lot of people citing this as fact, I couldn't find any official sources stating this. It's not brought up in either the lore books or the game. So, as far as I can tell, this is just a fan theory that happened to get spread around like it was fact. Garleans also seem to be compatible with interbreeding among the other spoken races, at least in terms of what is implied. The game makes the distinction that all pure-blooded Garleans possess this third eye trait, so that implies that there have been enough examples of mixed-race Garleans turning up without the third eye for that to be a well-known fact. Considering they've been running around Hydaelyn, the planet, conquering and colonizing and conscripting, it makes sense that they'd wind up commingling with the natives. Though, from a social standpoint, I imagine Garleans would be the kind of people to look down on mixed-race relationships. Another defining trait of the Garleans is their complete inability to use or channel ether through their bodies. This sets them apart from every other spoken race in the game, as all the other playable races and all of the beast tribes we encounter have this ability. Why pure-blooded Garleans can't use magic has never been elaborated on in the lore, at least not at this point, and while I do have some theories, since they're really just speculation, I'll save them to the end of the video. What's important here is how their inability to use magic shaped their society. See, while the Garlean Empire is a total powerhouse in modern-day Eorzea, without the ability to use magic, and before the invention of Magitech, they were actually one of the weakest races on Hydaelyn. The Garleans were essentially driven into the northernmost reaches of Ilsabard, where they lived a quiet, remote lifestyle for centuries. Actually, it was only relatively recently, around 50 years ago, that the Garleans started rapidly advancing their technology and expanding. A certain Garlean legatus began discovering a lot of technological advancements, the key one being ceruleum. Ceruleum is a highly volatile but potent energy source, and with it the Garleans were able to engineer Magitech, and power large industrial machines. They went through an industrial revolution, dramatically restructured their military, and quickly became a huge political and military power. In one fell swoop, they conquered the entire continent of Ilsabard. At some point, either before or during this conquest, the legatus who made these advancements possible became the emperor, taking the name Solus Zoscalvus. This could be considered the true birth of the Garlean Empire as we know it. Sometime after this point, the Garlean Empire focused its efforts on expanding out to and conquering the other two great continents. 25 years ago, the Garleans invaded Eorzea, constructed Castrum Fulminus as a forward base, and invaded Doma. Using their overwhelming military might and superior technology, as well as the aid of some traitorous locals such as the shinobi Master Gekkai, the Garleans easily defeated Doma and forced them to surrender. Hien's father, Kaian Regin, worked with the Garleans as deputy viceroy at this time. However, he was secretly working with the Doman Liberation Front behind the scenes, waiting for the time to drive the Garleans from Doma. 15 years before the story, the Garleans focused their efforts on conquering Eorzea. They launched a full-on assault on the continent of Aldenard, and our good old friend Gaius von Belzer was able to subjugate Alamigo. It should be noted that, at this time, Alamigo was considered to be the most powerful of the Eorzean city-states, so the other Eorzean nations were pretty much forced to work together here. Honestly, the Garleans probably would have had a really easy time conquering the other city-states, but then they made the mistake of going after Lake Silvertear first. See, Gaius knew that Lake Silvertear was the nexus of all ether, which made it a pretty critical location for Eorzea, and Hydaelyn, the planet as a whole, and Mordona was a very strategic location, being right in the middle of the continent. However, what he wasn't counting on was Midgard-Somer swooping in during the Battle of Silvertear and turning it into the infamous Battle of Silvertear Skies. Gaius' brand new toy, the Agrius, a giant airship, was no match for the ancient dragon. Midgard-Somer crushed it in his clutches and sent it crashing into the lake with him still wrapped around it. It was at this point when the ceruleum tanks on the Agrius exploded, and this released immense amounts of energy that reacted with the ether in the lake and catalyzed it. This not only released a metric buttload of ether into the environment, it also crystallized the ether surrounding Lake Silvertear, leading to those giant ether crystals seen there to this day. The ether this released also threw a wrench into Gaius' conquest, as the abundance of ether and the looming threat of the Garlean Empire forced many of the beast tribes to summon their respective primals. With the Agrius destroyed and the threat of primals ever present, this held the Garleans at bay, at least for a little while. Enter Nael von Darnus. Now, Nael's conquest of Eorzea and Project Meteor can and probably will be a topic for another video, but the important part here is the part everyone knows about already. Nael devised a plan to drop Dalamud on Eorzea to eliminate both the beast tribes and their primals, as well as, wiping out the entire continent. Nael was already aware that the Red Moon was a fake, an ancient Allagan artifact that could be controlled with Allagan technology. At some point, however, Nael's plan changed. During the early stages of researching Project Meteor, Nael was tempered by Bahamut, and therefore everything Nael did after this point was with the ulterior motive of freeing Bahamut. In 1.0 story, the Warrior of Light is able to defeat Nael and destroy the lunar transmitter calling Dalamud down, but they were unable to stop its descent. This led directly to the events of the Battle of Cartanu, where Louisoix planned to stop it with the power of the 12 deities, essentially summoning their power like primals. Of course, even he was unsuccessful to stop Dalamud's descent and Bahamut's release, which led to the 7th Umbral Calamity. Also, technically speaking, the Nael von Darnus that started Project Meteor wasn't actually the real Nael. This was Nael's sister, Yola, disguised as Nael. The lore behind that and the real-life explanations are so messy and convoluted that I'm not going to touch on that subject today, but this is the real, official reason why Nael shows up as a girl, not because Bahamut made him one. Following the 7th Umbral Calamity, Solus Zoscalvus' failing health left the Empire in a panic over his succession, leaving only Gaius and the 14th Legion to continue their campaign to conquer Eorzea. You guys know this part. Gaius finds the Ultima weapon and awakens it, the Warrior of Light and the Grand Company storm the Castrum, the Warrior of Light fights Nero and Gaius, then fights and destroys the Ultima weapon and defeats La Habrea, the Ascian who was manipulating him from behind the scenes. All these cutscenes are unskippable, the game literally never lets you forget this happened. With Gaius thought dead, Xenosiate Galvus was appointed Imperial Viceroy over Alamigo in Gaius' place, and his spy, Yotsuyu Brutus, was named the acting Viceroy of Doma. After this, the Eorzean Alliance declared the 7th Umbral Era to be over and the 7th Astral Era to have begun. It is during the 7th Astral Era that Solus Zoscalvus died without declaring a proper heir to the throne, throwing Garlemald into a war of succession. The two with the biggest claims to the throne were Solus's youngest son and Varus, Solus's grandson. This war was expected to last for a while and keep the Garleans busy for a time. However, it ended far sooner than expected, with Varus Galvus rising to claim the position of Emperor due to his superior experience as a legatus and his military prowess. Xenosia Galvus, Varus' son and thus now the crown prince of Garlemald, then crushed the resistance in Doma, which had taken advantage of the War of Succession to drive the Garleans out of Doman territory. It is at this point that Xenos killed Hien's father, Kian Regin, severely injured Hien himself and forced him into hiding, and forced the Domans to seek refuge in Eorzea. This explains the arrival of Yugiri Mistwalker and the other Doman refugees during the post-A Realm Reborn story. During Heavensward, the Garleans take a backseat as the primary antagonists, though they do play some role. Varus himself shows up once after Bismarck is summoned, blaming the Zundu tribe, who had nothing to do with the summoning, and trying to murder them, which we stop. Later, his right-hand legatus, Regula von Hydrus, shows up and ambushes the Warrior of Light and Company after they break through the barrier of Az's Law. This leads to Ysale sacrificing herself by summoning Shiva to cripple the airship. Regula does eventually get to Az's Law, but he plays a relatively minor role in the main story, and is mostly there for the Warring Triad side story. The next big change in the Garlean Empire at this point happens right at the end of Heavensward's post-expansion story, when Oberd sparks a conflict between the Garleans and the Eorzean alliance. He amassed a following, and had that following infiltrate the Garlean-controlled Baelzer's Wall, which is a large wall built on the edge of Garlean-controlled Eorzean territory, separating Alamigo from Gridania. He then had other members of his following attack the wall dressed in the uniforms of the three Grand Companies to make the Garleans think the attack was the work of the Alliance. Ilberd both succeeds in drawing the Eorzean alliance into a conflict with Garlemald for Alamigo, and summoning a powerful primal, which later falls into Garlean-controlled territory. This effectively draws Eorzea into an outright conflict, where they wind up liberating both Doma and Alamigo from Garlean rule by forcing the Garleans to fight on two fronts on opposite sides of the world. This also puts the Warrior of Light in direct conflict with Xenosia Galvus, who not only defeats the Warrior of Light twice before he's eventually defeated himself, but also gives himself an artificial echo, called the Resonant, that allows him to control primals and is presumably how he's able to survive his attempted suicide by transferring his soul to other bodies. Eventually, however, the continued conflicts between the Eorzean alliance, which now includes the liberated Alamigo, and Garlemald spark an all-out war between the two powers. Before this war, Varus comes to meet with the leaders of the Eorzean alliance and expresses his true beliefs. He deeply despises the state of the world as it is, and the Ascians' repeated manipulation of nations all over the world. It is here he reveals something. Remember Solas Galvus, the previous emperor? Well, turns out he was an Ascian too. He built the Garlean Empire from the ground up for the purpose of sowing strife in the world. In fact, he deliberately failed to name a successor before he died, specifically to sow the seeds of chaos in Garlemald. Ironically, even though Varus opposes them, his goal is most closely aligned with the Ascians. He wishes to complete the rejoining of the Source and its 13 reflections to make the world and humanity whole again. However, his goal is to make humanity complete again so they can set aside their differences and live in peace, as well as oppose the manipulations of the Ascians and take fate into their own hands. The extreme cost of life this would cause is, to him, a small price to pay. Because of this, the Eorzean Alliance and Garlemald aren't able to come to a peaceful solution and are plunged into a full-on war. Before I move on to topics specific to what we learn in Shadowbringers and its post-expansion story so far, I figured I'd take a moment to discuss the Garlean Empire as a whole from what we know of their history. Because an Ascian was manipulating the Garlean Empire from the start, it could be assumed that their militant structure and entire campaign of conquest was a result of the Ascians' goal of sowing chaos. It's hard to define the Garlean people as evil or bad in general, because how much of their beliefs and ideologies are influenced by the Ascians is unknown. I imagine the overall idea that the other nations are filled with quote-unquote savages, and their policies of subjugating the peoples of the nations they've conquered, is all to fuel this goal of sowing chaos and despair, making summonings more likely and pushing the world closer and closer to the calamities that aid the Ascians in their goal. We do see that some Garleans are unable to look past their empire's misdeeds, such as Cid Non-Garland, who defected after he saw how twisted his father had become and his overall disgust for Project Meteor as a whole. Furthermore, there are factions in Garlemald that wish to forge peace between the Empire and neighboring nations rather than war, such as the Populares. Maxima Quo Priscus, a Popularis, defected and aided the Domans and later the Eorzean alliance after he realized Asahi, the Garlean envoy sent to vie for peace, sabotaged the plan from the start. Furthermore, the War of Succession and various other internal conflicts show that, while the Empire initially seems united, there's a lot of internal tensions within Garlemald, and not everyone believes in the ideas their own nation puts forth. With that out of the way, it's time to move on to stuff we learn about the Garlean Empire in Shadowbringers and the post-expansion story thus far. Standard spoiler warnings apply here. I will be talking about stuff revealed in the MSQ past 5.0 from here on out. Normally, I'd say just wait until you play Shadowbringers before coming back, but this time I do have some announcements at the end of the video, so go ahead and skip to the timestamp on screen if you don't want to be spoiled. So, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Emet-Selch. Emet-Selch is the Ascian single-handedly responsible for constructing the Garlean Empire. Under the guise of Solus Sosgavus, Emet-Selch was the one to introduce ceruleum and magitech to the Garlean Empire, and was the one to restructure their industry and military to allow for an impressive amount of conquest and expansion. Because Emet-Selch was actually leading the Garlean Empire for much of its short history, it can be assumed that all of the things the Garleans did during his time as Emperor Solus was for the ultimate goal of their rejoining. In fact, it's even pointed out that, prior to the Garleans, there were a lot less summonings going on. Part of this can be attributed to the Battle of Silvertear Skies, but another part is no doubt due to the pressure on the Beast Tribes and even the Eorzeans themselves put on them by the Garlean Empire. After all, Project Meteor did force the Eorzean alliance to resort to summoning the 12 to deal with Dalaman and Bahamut. Speaking of Project Meteor, turns out it's not the only incredibly screwed up project the 7th Legion had up their sleeves, though to be fair it's explained that this 7th Legion has very little to do with the original 7th Legion that took part in Project Meteor. In 5.1's story, it's revealed that the Garleans were working on replicating the Ultima weapon. Estinian winds up fighting an incomplete prototype called the Arc Ultima, and later the 7th Legion reveals the Ruby weapon in patch 5.2. These two weapons have one thing in common. They both seem to have a tendency to fuse with their pilot. The prototype of Arc Ultima had an unnamed Garlean sticking out of its back, and after the Ruby weapon was initially defeated by the Warrior of Light, the core went out of control and fused itself to the pilot, creating a copy of the person whose combat data was stored in the machine. In this case, Nail von Darnus. Or, as mentioned earlier, actually his sister Eula. Also, as it turns out, the pilot inside, a girl named Melisandria, was alive and in excruciating pain the entire time until the projection of Nail was defeated. Also, the Imperials in charge of Project Ultima are actually a group of orphans that Gaius himself took in, and they're the ones piloting these machines. All of them are rather young, so it's possible that the weapons fusing with the pilots and causing them to die an excruciating death might be intentional, and Gaius' orphans are being used as sacrificial pawns. It also doesn't seem like a stretch that this is a personal slight against Gaius for defecting. But this storyline is still in its early stages, and that's really just baseless speculation at this point. Either way, what happened to the pilot of the Ruby weapon is really screwed up, and is probably going to happen again the next time we fight one of these weapons. So keep that in mind when you're having fun beating up the Emerald weapon or whatever once that fight drops. You know what else is screwed up? Xenos is back. And he's in his original body again. And he killed his father, potentially making him the Emperor. It wasn't confirmed that he's become the Emperor of Garlemald, but he does seem to be in a position of high power again, and it makes logical sense that he would ascend to the throne since he was the Crown Prince of Garlemald when his father died. So where the Garlean Empire is going to go from here is unclear, but it's pretty obvious that with someone like Xenos at the reins, things are going to get messed up real fast. We also learn more about Project Meteor and Cid's father and life in Garlemald here, but seeing as I'm probably going to be making both a Project Meteor and a Cid video later on, I'll save this topic for another day. There's one more thing I wanted to mention about the Garleans before I end the video, and that's specifically the Garleans and not the Empire as a whole. See, I mentioned earlier how unique it was that the Garleans can't use magic, unlike all of the other spoken races in the game, both playable and non-playable. However, Shadowbringers highlights another weird thing. The Garleans don't exist in the first. Or at least, we don't ever see any examples of Garleans in the first, and a race of peoples who can't use magic is never brought up anywhere. Now, this isn't entirely fair, because it's possible that, like the Garleans of the Source before Emet-Selch started meddling, the Garleans of the First might have just lived in a remote corner of the star due to their inability to use magic, and they didn't stand out much before being wiped out by the Flood. However, it's possible that the reason we don't see the Garleans in the first is that they simply never existed in the first. This would imply that the Garleans exist only in the source. Combining that with their inability to use magic, and there's a lot of interesting conclusions you can make about them. I've seen theories ranging from they were developed by the Alligans to they were created by the Ascians after the Sundering, and therefore only exist in the source because they weren't around to be split. I can't really speak for any of these one way or another, since we simply don't have enough information. We do know that part of Zodiark's restoration of the original world was creating life that Emet-Selch considered to be incomplete, and thus worth sacrificing to Zodiark to bring back the other Ancients. So it's possible that this life was the ancient Garleans, and they can't use magic because, unlike the other races, they aren't split from the souls of the Ancients, but are the intact creation of Zodiark. Why they only exist in the source in this case, and how they escaped the Sundering is unknown, but then again, this whole theory is speculation. We don't even know for sure if the Garleans didn't exist in the first, but I felt like it was an interesting enough topic to bring up, even if there really isn't much evidence for any of it yet. With that being said, I'm going to end this here. Now, there are more things that I can say about the Garleans, but I feel like all of them at this point would be better saved for videos about individual Garleans. There was one more thing I wanted to discuss at some point, that being the Garlean naming scheme, but seeing as I already promised you guys an inevitable video about the naming schemes of the other races, I figured it'd be better if I just talked about the Garleans' naming schemes in that video instead. Before I go, I did want to apologize for how late this video was. As you can see, it's a bit of a longer video than what I normally do. This was a pretty in-depth topic, so doing the research took me longer than expected, but even with that, I still wish I had gotten it out sooner. That being said, I am going to try something new. I'm going to be trying to post a video a week from now on. Now, don't get too excited, that's a significant ramp up of my production schedule so far, and while I think I can manage it with my current schedule, not every video is going to have the same level of depth of research and quality of editing, not that my editing skills are amazing to begin with, if I'm trying to churn them out every week. That being said, you can expect a proper episode of Lore of Eorzea every few weeks or so, with shorter discussion videos and other things I might experiment around with in between. I'm also going to be streaming more as well. I plan on streaming at least 3 times a week from now on. I'm currently trying to work out a proper streaming schedule because I've been doing a lot of frontlines in the game, and I want to pick days that aren't dead for PvP. It's been a lot of fun lately, and I definitely recommend you guys checking that out. Once I get a proper schedule up, I'll be posting that on both my Twitch page and my Twitter, as well as mentioning it in the next video, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, if you want streaming announcements and other Final Fantasy XIV content, be sure to follow me on Twitter at @TheSaltExarch. With that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like. If you have any questions, suggestions, or comments, drop them down below in the comment section. And if you want more Final Fantasy XIV lore content from me, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. YouTube has been being weird with notifications lately, apparently, so just a heads up on that one as well. As always, I hope you guys enjoy the video, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace out.